Now let's get into what the mother bodies have currently been doing. Now the ANC has currently released the election manifesto, and Bali, what was your first reaction to that? What stood out for you?
Well, I think with all parties' manifestos, they're a guideline on what they'd like to achieve. And I think that everyone looking at the ANC's manifesto thought there was some big ambitions in that manifesto. I think the one that stood out for a lot of people was the possible creation of 6 million jobs. And I think that we need to take that with a pinch of salt, considering that when President Zuma first came into his position, he had promised that he would have created 5 million jobs, of which we haven't really seen. So that was the first big, I think, sort of alarm bell that must sound when you look at the ANC's manifesto. The rest of it is pretty much, I think, much of the same that we've heard from the ANC over the years. We will improve things, we will try and make sure that everybody gets a house. You know, the usual things that we hear from the ANC. We haven't seen it happening, and certainly towards the last sort of 2 or 3 years, the ANC has been dramatically failing people in terms of their election manifesto. So it'll be interesting how they, try and implement this. But, this is their manifesto as a party, and they must dream big if that's what they plan to achieve.
Mohammed, your response to that?
With regards to the ANC having failed and not implemented, I think we need to look at the context of the global economic meltdown also. The current leadership of the African National Congress has taken our country pretty much, not unscathed, but in a sense less affected negatively than many of the other countries through the global economic meltdown. The whole idea of job losses, jobs have been lost all around the world. But there have been improvements. There have been various improvements. And I'm not going to go into an in-depth tit-for-tat discussion. I'll rather present what the ANC speaks about. And I think, finally, the manifesto speaks directly to the underlying character of the African National Congress, which is the National Democratic Revolution. The transformation of South African society from the effects of apartheid, dealing with the effects of apartheid in terms of its underlying issues. Yeah, so I think it.
If I could just make two points on what my colleague has just said. I'm glad that he brought that up, because I think the two issues that he speaks about are one of character of the ANC and the other of the amalgamation of all these different voices that we hear in the ANC. Now, I think many people outside of the ANC would argue that that's precisely what we should have seen in the manifesto, is how these voices are going to be quelled when there's contestation, and how we're actually going to see leadership from the ANC. And a good example, obviously, is the stalling of COSATU's and the youth wage subsidy, which we had in the ANC. And those kinds of principles where you have three very strong voices within one organization that speak from different places. What we should have seen in this manifesto is how those kinds of issues are going to play themselves out. And when it comes to the character, what would it be nice to also see in this manifesto is how, when issues of certainly what I don't think is an ANC ideal or principle of not having accountability, which we've seen happening quite frequently in the last few years, and especially with our president's residential home upgrades, it would have been good to see what kind of leadership the ANC was proposing that they would actually provide in this manifesto.